I live in an apartment building that has 4 apartments on each floor. The apartments are split in 2 groups by something we call a bubble. Basically, 2 apartments share this bubble, and there's a metal door guarding them before each tenant goes to their own doors. My husband works as a doctor, so he had to go to work for his night shift. I usually do house chores when he goes to work, so the house is clean when he comes back in the morning. I turn on scary stories on my Xbox and do my work. I have 2 cats, Xena, who is 5 years old, and Marcel, who is 3 months old. They are usually very playful during nighttime. At one point, they both stop from chasing each other and stare at the door without moving or blinking. Xena having her back curled and silently hissing under the door. She never expresses such behavior, so having her react like this made me very curious. At the same time, one of the stories that I was listening to was about home invaders. And from the local news, we've been informed how most of the time, said invaders will check on the houses they want to break into, and learn the owner's schedules and stuff before trying to break in. This made me feel very insecure, and I turned the volume lower in order to hear what was going on the other side of my door. Which, by the way, it's impossible to get to, unless you unlock the first metal door, which has the sole purpose of extra protection for my and my neighbor's apartment. My neighbor is a lonely old lady that has 2 cats of her own, and is ironically the building manager. It must have been around midnight, and she was most likely sound asleep. I turn the volume to my TV down and go closer to the door. Xena has not moved. I pressed my ear against the door, searching for sounds. I couldn't hear much, except the distinguished sound of heavy breathing. It gave me goosebumps, and I immediately started looking around the house for something to defend myself with in a worst-case scenario, thinking that if he broke past the metal door all by himself, then my apartment door might not be a challenge for him. I took my husband's baseball bat and held on to it with my life. I took my cats and hid them in the cupboard under the sink. I don't know why. I don't have children yet, but that was what came into my mind first. And then I went back to the door. I opened the peephole to look at the person breathing through my door at midnight, and my heart sunk to my stomach. All I could see was an eye. A very veiny, red and popped-out eye staring back at me, right into my soul, followed by repeating and faster breathing, as if it knew I was watching back. I didn't move or make a sound, hoping that it would make the creep go away. But that was not the case. I see the doorknob moving frantically. He was trying to get inside, murmuring something that I couldn't make out. I freeze, holding the baseball bat to my shoulder level, basically preparing myself to bash this guy's head if he managed to get inside. As he was trying desperately, fighting with both the doorknob and the keyhole, because I could hear noises coming from the keyhole, an idea came to mind. I rushed to the living room, which is very close to the entrance door, and blast the scary story video. Luckily, the specific story was narrated by a man with a very heavy voice, and from the outside it must have sounded like there was someone inside the apartment having a conversation, mostly a monologue. I live in a country where English is not a native language, and few people speak it. At last, what I prayed would work actually did. The moment I blasted the volume to max, the doorknob stopped moving, and as I checked the peephole for that creepy man, he was no longer there, but the metal outside door was wide open. Of course, my neighbor only now wakes up from my podcast basically blaring in my house, asking me to turn it down. I tell her what happened, and ask why she hadn't heard anything. She said she had her TV on as well, as she sleeps with it on so she doesn't feel alone, and didn't hear anything. We both examined the metal door, asking each other if we left it open. I even called my husband at work to ask him the same thing, and he told me he checked it twice as usual. I don't know what I would have done if this guy managed to break into my house, but I do think it would have been bad. I never thought that of all the possibilities of salvation, a scary story would be what would save my life. Mimic. I think that's the right word for what it is. But I've also seen people call similar experiences doppelgangers, so maybe that's the right term. My grandma's house has had weird goings on since before I was born. Mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs and VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. Anyway, it seems one of them may be a mimic. My grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncles saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. They thought maybe he had come home without them noticing, but his car wasn't in the driveway either time, and he came home later and insisted he hadn't been home. My mother also claimed she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes. It scared her because she knew that logically it wasn't right, but it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother. And now my personal experience. My sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, through high school even. We all slept in her bed, and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. Well, I woke up one morning, but I was still in a state of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway, looking at me. I figured she had just come up to see if I was awake yet, but then she leaned backwards and out of sight. Something about the way she moved just wasn't quite right, and that's when I realized I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. It struck me as odd that she would walk away from bacon while it was on the stove. She was in her 70s at this time, and though she got around well for her age, taking the stairs was still a bit of a task and took some time. It didn't make sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs and look at me. She could have just yelled at me to see if I was up. I called out to her, asking her if she was upstairs. From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs. She walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said no, she was making bacon. I freaked a little, got out of bed and booked it downstairs. My sister was already down there, which is why she was already making bacon before I was up. Both of them said she had not been upstairs, so I told them what happened. That's when my grandma told us the stories about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there. So yeah, I've been a little scared of my grandma's house ever since. Hardly anyone knows it, but Windfall, Indiana exists. It exists in such a way that when you're there, you feel like you're in a completely separate world. No shops, no restaurants, no anything. Just a gas station, a bar, a post office, and some dirt roads. It has an energy to it. Like you can feel a thickness in the air that offsets your intuition. It makes a human being's natural senses spike, like an animal who knows a predator is nearby. At least that's how I personally feel about it. The entire place is off-putting. The people aren't much better either. I was only 13 when we moved there. My older sister was 16 and my younger one was 12. Both of them did considerably better than I did socially at school, and I was often left by myself at our new home. Mom was working quite a bit and often stayed after hours. She said it was because we needed the money, and I'm positive we did, but I think it was more so to keep her mind off the divorce. The new house was small, a 3-bed, 1-bath with a dining room and a living room. We had a fenced-in backyard and a muddy lawn with an old tree sagging over it. It was the dead of winter, and as a 13-year-old girl going through her first of many depressive episodes to come, I submerged myself into the internet. I came home every day to an empty house, made myself a snack, and planted myself on the couch to get lost in a YouTube rabbit hole until my eyes hurt. We'd only lived in the house for a couple of weeks, but I was beginning to adjust to a new life. Sure, I didn't like Windfall, but I wasn't afraid of our house. School was miserable, but I cherished my time to myself. I felt as if I was getting a small taste of the adult life 13-year-old me was so eager to have. I wasn't scared to be alone, until I caught sight of him. Sometimes in my YouTube crusade, I'd get distracted by the TV and my laptop screen would fall asleep. I'd look down and jiggle my mouse and get back to it. But this time, there was a small shape standing behind me in the doorway of my mom's bedroom. Just a short apparition with noticeably spiked hair. He didn't move, but the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up, and my skin began to break out in goosebumps. As quick as he appeared, he was gone. I hadn't turned to face him, but I knew in my heart it had to be a little boy. I wasn't afraid of him. The house was old and I felt that maybe he was just curious. I didn't get the feeling that he was bad or that maybe I should fear him. He'd just surprised me, was all. It became normal to see him. Most times he was in the reflection of my screen. Other times I'd look up and see him leaning against the doorway of the dining room. He was never in color, only a black shadow that faded away as soon as I blinked. I didn't want to tell my sisters or my mom. I'd been getting horribly bullied at school nearly every day, and I felt if I were to say something, they'd make fun of me, or simply call me crazy. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being alone. Either way, he was harmless. At first. Soon he began to appear closer to me, or things in the house would fall over mysteriously. Cabinets would slam shut or the TV would turn off. Curtains would sway as if someone had run their hand through them. I'd just blare my headphones and stay put on the couch, staring at my laptop and praying that somebody, anybody, would come home. I'd see him and my face and palms would begin to sweat. I started to feel like maybe the curious spirit wasn't so innocent, like he was teasing me or pushing his limits to see just what he could do to instill fear in me. I'd never tried to talk to him or communicate, and quite honestly, I had no interest in trying. The first time I ever saw him in detail, I was in my bed. My little sister and I shared a room. I had top bunk while she was on the bottom. I began to wake in the middle of the night, sweaty with my heart racing. I'd look over the railing of my bed and see him standing in the dead center of my room, staring at my little sister as she slept. He was skinny and he had a red plaid button-up shirt tucked into black pants. He had spiked bleached blonde hair and pale blue eyes. What stuck out about him was how white his skin was. He looked nearly albino, yet his lips were a shade of deep purple. I'd be too afraid to close my eyes or to even breathe. I'd wake in the nights to come, holding my eyes shut, because I knew when I opened them, he'd be there. Some nights my sister wouldn't be in her bed because she was still young enough to want to be in my mom's bed, and he'd still just stand there, staring, not acknowledging me or letting it be known that he knew I was there, but I knew he knew. As I kept this secret, our household began to fall apart. My sisters and I were constantly fighting. My depression was worsening, and self-harm crept into my daily life. My mother began to drink heavier, and in fits of rage or sadness, she'd say things she didn't mean. She'd changed into a person filled with anger, when she'd once been so loving and sweet. My family began to feel like strangers to me. This led to even more time in the house on my own, as my sisters used their friends' houses as an escape. I had made no friends at my new school, So the only thing I could do to get away was to take walks to the gas station, or play with the dog the next door neighbors kept chained outside to a tree. Every time I'd see the little boy, I'd stop what I was doing and go sit with that dog. I'd stay put for a few hours until someone arrived home. Things hit their peak when it came time for me to bathe. I loved baths, but for some reason when I took baths at this house, I felt nothing but anxiety. My chest would tighten and burn when I'd lay back to wash my hair, and I'd feel like I couldn't bring myself back up. I'd scream for my mother because I often felt paralyzed with fear. Just looking at the bathtub gave me an uneasy feeling and sent my heartbeat banging through my ears. Eventually, my anxiety of baths evolved into a full-fledged fear of water. Swimming pools, lakes, it's all ruined for me. When I think back on it, it never felt as if the house had a happiness to it, only darkness, and that same energy that Windfall emitted so strongly. I was overcome with relief when Mom let us know that she and my stepdad had worked things out, and we'd be moving back home. I couldn't have gotten out of that house fast enough. The only thing I didn't want to leave behind was the neighbor's dog. I eventually learned to shove away those memories. The little boy's face still popped up in my dreams from time to time, but I'd gotten over my anxiety of being home alone. Mom got better, and eventually went back to being her old self again. Time passed and the depression got easier to manage. I'd nearly forgotten about him. We'd all been drinking around the bonfire one night, shooting the shit and talking about old memories. I was 20 now, and felt that I could bring up the boy and handle whatever backlash I got from it. I asked my mom if she remembered the house, and if she ever saw anything there. "Oh, for sure. That place was haunted as shit," were her exact words. "Yeah," my older sister chimed in. "There was a little boy there, but he was not a little boy." I felt my heart drop to my stomach. He was evil. I'd always see him running around the dining room table, or standing in Mom's doorway. That's why I was always at Olivia's, because I hated that fucking house. I told them my story, all of it. I told them why I'd suddenly become so afraid of water, and why I hated being alone. It wasn't just him. There was an old woman there too, my mom said. She'd stand in the dining room and tell me to get out of her house. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and she'd be standing at the end of my bed staring at me, pissed as hell. That's why I'd get up in the middle of the night and grab your sister out of bed, so she could sleep next to me because I was so scared. One of the scariest times, I woke up and saw that boy sitting on my dresser, swinging his legs. He hopped off the dresser, walked to the side of my bed, and jumped at me. He jumped straight at me and then disappeared. Mom continued on. When we left, I looked up the house, and it turns out an old lady used to own that house, and she died there. "What about the little boy?" I asked. "Yeah, a little boy died in the house back in the 70s. He drowned. Since leaving the house, I've returned to Windfall a handful of times to visit family. The energy is still there, that heaviness and otherworldliness. As years go on, more and more ghost stories emerge from Windfall and the people who lived there. There's something about that place that falls just perfectly on a wave of paranormal possibility. It radiates with things I don't know if we as a species will ever be able to wrap our heads around. Windfall, Indiana exists, and so does everything else in it. I wanted to share this and see if anyone else has experienced it, or maybe knew more about it and could help me understand. About 5 years or so ago, I went into a coma brought on by a blood clot in my lung. After about a month, I came out of the coma, and the insanity started shortly after. To say I had visions at this point isn't really accurate. It started as just shadows, popping up where a shadow wouldn't appear, and then moving around. I had vision checks, and nothing could explain why I was seeing these shadows from an ocular standpoint. A little while later, about a couple months, I was driving down the road and almost caused an accident because someone was standing in the road that wasn't there. I slammed on my brakes and scared everyone in the car. The person outside just stared at me. My husband, my kids, no one else was seeing what I was seeing. Fast forward to current day, and I now see these people all the time. I have 5 people living in my house that don't leave. Plus I'll see randoms outside just appear and stare at me. They don't communicate with me in any way. At least I can't figure out how to communicate. They don't speak, but one in particular will touch me at random times, hold my hand, put his hand on my chest if I'm starting to panic or if I don't feel well. Doctors have put me on different meds for it, but none of them have helped get rid of the people, so I quit taking them. They don't bother me with being here. They bring no harm. I just wish I understood why this is happening, and I hope someone else maybe can relate to it. This experience occurred when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I'm 15 now. I went to this small local daycare with about 4 other kids, all roughly the same age as me. The woman who ran the daycare wanted to take us all on a small trip to see her mother in a nursing home. It was on the other side of town, which wasn't too far. The other kids and I all got into the caretaker's carpool van, and we drove there. While in the waiting room, the caretaker was at the front desk talking to the person behind it. I remember looking down the hallway. The waiting room kind of began to extend into the actual other areas of the nursing home, and saw a woman wearing all black sitting in a chair at the very end of the hall. She had a black dress on, black tights, and a huge black sun hat that draped over her face. Nobody seemed to be paying her any mind. Nobody even seemed to acknowledge that she was even sitting there at all. I walked up to her and noticed that she was looking down and wouldn't look up at me. I noticed that the veins on her arms were extremely visible, almost protruding, and she seemed to be covered in saran wrap from head to toe, like some sort of film all over her. It was wrapped around her hands, her neck, and as far as I could see from under her sun hat, it was on her face as well. And her skin was quite wrinkly too, but I assumed that she was just old or something. Being the annoying-ass 5-year-old I was, I decided to poke her until she looked at me. I kept poking and poking her hand, but she wouldn't respond. But after a while, she finally looked up. Her eyes were a glassy white, and her irises were white as well. She had no pupils. She had a bemused expression on her face, no smile or frown. Scared the living shit out of me. But I only really got scared when I noticed that the saran wrap was skin tight against her face as well. It didn't click at the time. I just thought she was a scary woman. But how could anyone breathe if they're covered in saran wrap from head to toe? Why were her eyes glassy and white? I ended up scurrying back to the caretaker at the front desk, and me and all the other kids ended up meeting her mother that day. She was a nice lady. Nobody else seemed to notice that woman though, and I've only told a few people about this because I know it sounds crazy. But I wanted to know if any Redditors here can debunk this, or have had anything similar happen. Thanks. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are down in the description. You know what always irritated me and it's really pissing me off lately is the whole YouTubers like going, you know, if you found something useful in this video, subscribe and drop a like. Or if you want to be able to find your way back. I know how to find my way back. And that's why I never did it to you guys. But you know what? Maybe I'm the idiot for not doing it. You know, it's like, let's see if we can hit a goal of 7,000 likes today. And it's like, that shit works for you? I just can't believe it. I mean, I guess I see it more on, like, if I watch stuff about gaming. Which, trust me, if I had a good internet here, I would absolutely be playing video games. Too. Playing some horror games and shit. So enough about that. I was thinking it might be funny to, because you know, those of you who know me, every now and then, or actually kind of most of the time, especially on True Vids, I'll do something at the end, like either a goofy skit, or I've ranted before, or I'll make some music to put on the end. And I was thinking it might be cool to, like, have an advice segment or something where you guys ask me questions either in the comments or you can email me TheDevilsInterval@gmail.com, but the 3's are E's. That way I can, like, get you guys involved, like, read whose comment it is, and maybe have some decent advice. Or something goofy, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. But maybe, like, do that too every few videos if you guys need some advice. And I'm not trying to say I know anything or I'm somebody. I'm fucking no one. Like every other human on the planet. But I don't know. It could be fun. So anyway, I love you guys. And be good to animals, even people. See ya.
Ja, snälla, Bergsbes, Hörs.